These are some frequently asked questions about the single subject rule in initiatives. First, is there a single subject rule for initiatives? Yes, Article 2, Section 8D provides an initiative measure embracing more than one subject may not be submitted to the electors or have any effect. Now, is there also a single subject rule for legislation? Yes, a similar rule exists for bills considered by the California legislature, and California's courts have interpreted the rules in a similar manner. So, what's the purpose of the single subject rule? The general idea behind the single subject rule is to ensure that measures are not overly complex or that they do not possibly confuse or hide provisions in a multifaceted measure. Some have argued the single subject rule does, also precludes combining, both popular and unpopular but unrelated provisions in one omnibus measure that'll try to increase the chances of passage of that bill. Now, what's prohibited by the single subject rule? Based upon the language contained in Section 8D, if an initiative embraces more than one subject, then it can neither be submitted to the voters nor be enacted by the voters. This actually means that there are two opportunities to challenge an initiative measure based upon the single subject rule. So there's a pre election challenge opportunity or a post election challenge. How do the California courts generally interpret the single subject rule? They say that an initiative measure does not violate the single subject requirement if, despite its varied collateral effects, all of its parts are reasonably germane to each other and to the general purpose or object of the initiative. The single subject rule does not require functional interrelationship or interdependence of provisions, or a showing that each one of the measure's several provisions was capable of getting voter approval independently of the other provisions. This was stated by the California Supreme Court in the main case Raven versus Deukmejian in 1990. How do the California courts generally review the purpose of the single subject rule? Quote, minimization of the risk of voter confusion and deception was one of the purposes of the single subject requirement of the California Constitution in Article 2, Section 8D, where an initiative measure will not violate the single subject requirement if, despite its varied collateral effect, all of its parts are reasonably germane to each other. This is from Amador Valley Joint Union High School versus the State Board of Equalization in 1978 Cal Supreme Court. And finally, what's the general rule for the single subject rule as applied to initiatives? The basic guidance we've received from the courts is whether the provisions of the initiative are quote unquote reasonably germane to each other, which is a pretty broad test, as you can imagine. And germane is defined generally as being relevant to the same particular subject matter. So, this again is also a broad definition based upon relevancy to the main topic of the initiative.